All right, so get ready to dive deep today because we're tackling a topic that I know you're all passionate about, sustainability.
Hmm.
And let's be honest for a second, who isn't feeling a little overwhelmed by all the information out there these days?
Yeah, absolutely.
You sent over this really intriguing research paper. It's called Modeling Sustainability Performance to Achieve Absolute Reductions in Socio-Ecological Systems.
Right.
And it definitely has some eye-opening ideas in it.
Yeah, it's a really fascinating paper. Actually, what I think is so interesting about it is that it goes beyond just saying reduce your footprint,
Mm.
you know,
Yeah.
and it introduces a whole new way to think about sustainability, almost like a health check
Right.
for societies and lifestyles.
Okay.
They call it system fitness.
System fitness.
Yeah.
Okay. I like that. But before we jump into system fitness, I feel like we have to address the elephant in the room or maybe the buzzword in the room. We've all heard terms like planetary boundaries and the triple bottom line.
Right.
But how often do we actually stop and really think about what they mean?
It's true. And sometimes it can feel like we're trying to navigate with a map that only shows half the landmarks.
Yeah.
These concepts are definitely important, but they don't always capture the complexity of how our consumption patterns, what we buy, use, and ultimately dispose of, impact the world around us.
So it's not just about reducing our impact, but also about being more mindful of what we're consuming in the first place.
Exactly. And that's where I think this idea of system fitness comes in.
Okay.
Imagine a doctor assessing your overall health. They wouldn't just look at your weight, right?
Right.
They'd consider your diet, exercise, sleep, stress levels, the whole picture.
The whole 9 yards.
Yeah. System fitness is about applying that same holistic approach to entire societies, companies, or even our own individual lives.
Okay, so it's about understanding the interconnectedness of everything, but how do we actually measure system fitness?
Well, that's where things get really interesting. This paper argues that we need to go beyond just measuring our environmental impact and start considering how essential our consumption is.
Okay.
In other words, how well does what we consume actually meet our needs?
So it's like the difference between me snacking on potato chips all day versus having a balanced meal.
Yeah,
Like both have an environmental impact, but one is way more essential for my well-being than the other.
precisely.
Hmm.
And to really illustrate this point, the researchers created a simulation of a fictional country called Suland.
Suland. All right, tell me more about this simulated society. I'm always up for a good thought experiment.
So picture this. Suland has a stable population, a steady supply of renewable resources, and everyone's basic needs are met.
Okay,
It's like a sustainability sandbox.
I like it.
And within this sandbox, they created these four quirky categories for consumption,
Okay.
each with a fun medieval sounding name.
Okay, get ready for some quirky names. We've got the peasant's basket, the knight's basket. It sounds like we're about to play a medieval game of sustainable shopping.
Yeah,
But seriously, what do these baskets actually represent?
they're a clever way to categorize goods and services based on their environmental impact
Yeah.
and their essentiality.
Okay.
Let's start with the peasant's basket. These are things with a low environmental impact, but a high level of essentiality,
Hmm.
like nutritious food, basic health care, or education.
Got it. Things we need to survive and thrive, but that don't put a huge strain on the planet.
Right.
So what goes in the knight's basket?
Think of things that have a higher impact, but are still pretty essential for our modern lives, like
Mhm.
transportation technology and infrastructure.
Okay.
We need them, but they come with a bigger environmental footprint.
Okay, so we've got the essentials covered with the peasant and the knight. But what about the non-essential items? The things that we often convince ourselves we need, even though we probably don't.
Ah, yes. Those would fall into the jester's basket
Okay.
and the noble's basket.
Okay.
The jester's basket is for items with a low environmental impact, but also low essentiality. Think fast fashion, trendy gadgets, or those luxury potato chips you mentioned earlier.
Right. Things that might bring a fleeting moment of joy, but aren't exactly crucial for our survival. What about the noble's basket? That sounds extravagant.
Indeed, the noble's basket is reserved for the high-impact, low-essentiality items, things like luxury travel, excessive consumption of resources, or anything that screams wants rather than needs.
So basically, the things we could probably live without, but have a big impact on the planet.
Yeah.
It's interesting because I feel like we often focus on the obvious culprits, the high impact industries. But this framework suggests that even seemingly low impact choices can add up if we're not careful.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
And that's where the Suland simulation becomes really insightful. The researchers basically said, let's see what happens when we play around with different consumption patterns and policies. For example, What do you think would happen if Sulin decided to focus all his efforts on reducing consumption from the high-impact nobles and knights' baskets? Would that lead to a sustainable utopia?
Hmm. I'm sensing a plot twist here. It seems almost too simple, right?
You're catching on. What they found was that if Sulin solely focused on reducing those high-impact baskets, it actually backfired
Whoa, really? Why is that?
because it created a void that was quickly filled by increased consumption from the jester's basket. People in Sulin might be driving less and consuming fewer luxury goods, but they've suddenly got a whole lot of time and resources to, say, collect those trendy potato chip brands or buy the latest gadgets.
It's like that saying, nature abhors a vacuum. Even if we eliminate the big bads, we can still end up consuming our way towards collapse if we don't address the underlying systems and patterns. You've probably experienced this yourself. Have you ever decluttered your entire house only to find yourself accumulating new stuff a few months later? It's easy to fall back into old habits if we don't change our mindset.
Exactly. This is why simply focusing on reducing our carbon footprint without considering what we're consuming is like putting a Band-Aid on a broken leg.
Mm.
We need a more holistic approach. Remember how we talked about those traditional sustainability models often missing the mark? This is a prime example of why. It's like rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic.
So what does work in Suland? How do they achieve that system fitness sweet spot?
The most effective strategy in the simulation involved constantly monitoring both the essentiality and the environmental impact of consumption. It's about finding that balance. When things started to go out of balance, they made adjustments, sometimes reducing consumption across all the baskets, including the seemingly harmless ones.
That makes sense. It's like maintaining a healthy weight.
Yeah.
It's not enough to just cut out sugary drinks. You need to look at your overall diet and exercise habits, even the things that seem insignificant on their own.
That's a great analogy. And just like with personal health, maintaining system fitness in Suland, or in any society for that matter, requires constant vigilance and adaptation. There's no finish line to cross. It's an ongoing process.
This whole idea of system fitness and constantly monitoring and adjusting, it's a lot to wrap our heads around. So let's bring this back to our listeners. What does this all mean for them in their everyday lives?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And this paper doesn't offer any easy answers, but it does give us a really valuable framework for thinking about these complex issues.
A framework for thinking. I like that. It's
Yeah.
about empowering us to ask the right questions rather than just handing us a list of solutions.
Precisely. This research encourages us to take a hard look at our own lives and our communities. How fit is our current lifestyle? Where are the hidden impacts lurking beneath the surface of our choices? What are the things we tell ourselves are essential, but might actually fall into that jester's basket?
Yeah, it's about being more mindful and more discerning, especially in a world that's constantly bombarding us with messages about what we supposedly need to be happy or successful.
Absolutely. And it's about recognizing that our choices have ripple effects. Just like in that Sulin simulation, our individual actions, when multiplied across millions or even billions of people, can have a huge impact on the system as a whole.
It's both empowering and a little daunting at the same time, isn't it? It means we have a responsibility to make informed choices.
It definitely challenges us to step up. This paper reminds us that sustainability isn't just some abstract concept for future generations to deal with. It's about the choices we're making right now in this moment.
So if there is one key takeaway you hope listeners will remember from this deep dive, what would it be?
I'd say it's this. Question everything. Don't accept the simplistic narratives. Dig deeper, examine your own consumption patterns, and always consider that essentiality factor in all aspects of your life.
I love that question. Everything. It's a great mantra for navigating our complex world. Well, on that note, it's time to wrap up this deep dive. But before we go, we want to leave you with one final provocative thought to ponder.
Okay.
The researchers behind this Sulin simulation focused on a single fictional country. But what if we scaled up this model? What if we imagined a global system fitness index? How would we measure it? Who would be responsible for maintaining it? And what trade-offs might we have to make as a global community to achieve a truly sustainable and equitable future for all?
Those are some big, important questions.
They really are. And ones that we encourage you to keep exploring. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into system fitness. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep making a difference.